So today we're going to talk a little bit about cold weather starting. We're going to talk about the deuce. I said cold weather starting, not necessarily a cold start. Yes, it's a cold start, but not like, you know, you see the ones where it's 20 below zero or whatever, and they start things up, and amazingly it starts or it won't start or whatnot. We'll talk a little bit about that. First, we're gonna end up starting this thing up, and then we're gonna talk about a few things, and some of the stuff is gonna be about regular vehicles, I should say, and then some of it's gonna be out the deuce, and some of it's gonna be out diesels. Nothing exciting, but stuff that people should kind of know, and things that people don't know or don't think about. First off, disclaimer, we're not going to check the oil in the antifreeze. This truck hasn't been moved for a while. I know it's good. It hasn't been that long, and I had just done some antifreeze, some work on the heating system and so on and so forth, and just changed the oil, and haven't moved it much since then. So first thing we're going to do is, it's not super cold out. It's in the low 20s. It's above 20, but it's probably somewhere around 23 degrees or so out here, and it's not supposed to get above 32 today. And yes, that is Fahrenheit, not Celsius. But so not particularly cold, but not warm. You know, typical New England day this time of year probably. But first thing we're going to do is, there's a little bit of snow on it. We've had some snow, not much, but a little bit. I like to clean off by the air intake on these trucks. Eventually I want to put a snorkel on this thing, not a big snorkel, but just a short one, because if not, they sit right in the snow. And then it can kind of suck some snow right up into it. So I'm going to set you down for a second here. It'll get too cold. I'm going to put you right here in the snow. Put my gloves on, only so I can just brush the snow off. You know, if I was like a true northerner, I'd be out here in my shorts and t-shirt and, you know, barehanded and just brush this off. But I'll do it this way. So first, I'm just going to clear a little bit of that snow out from there. It's not like there was much of a danger of it sucking in snow, because it's not very much snow, but I figured I'll just brush that off some. Alright. Now let's head inside the cab of our truck here. And we got some stuff lying around in here. This hasn't been started for a few weeks. As I said, normally you would check your oil and check your antifreeze level, make sure it's in the neck. Okay, now that we're back with a camera that doesn't just keep shutting off on us, let's just get this thing started up. First thing we'll do is put our battery on and probably hear the loud noise of the buzzer. Oh, it helps if you come over here, push in your engine stop, and turn it on. Now that you can't hear anything, we're just going to push this in. Now I'm going to give it a couple quick taps just to make sure it's not hydro locked. Okay. Alright, now we're going to fire her up. There you go. She's off and running. Now that we got the deuce started, you can watch me eat cake. Let's talk about that colder startup with the deuce, and we'll also talk about real cold startups. And we'll also discuss some other vehicles and some tips for wintertime startups and all that good stuff. But first, let me apologize. I'm sorry you have to look at my face while we do this video. I couldn't come up with anything else that you could watch. My dog is gone. We're not going to discuss that. And I don't have any puppies around here that you can watch. But wait a minute, we can fix that. There, much better. Okay. In all seriousness, this video is not about being exciting. It's not an edutainment video either, which those videos are great, and for you guys to put those out, that's great. But we're just going to discuss a couple things about cold weather startups. Obviously that startup was not super cold, and you notice that the deuce started up right away. First off, your deuce should do that if it's in real good shape and it's set up the way it should be. It should have no problem. A multi-fuel deuce is actually easier than a lot of the old diesels are to start up, because it's not really a diesel. It is and it isn't. But you may have a system in your truck. You may have the flame heater system. You may have an ether system. Then you may have no system in there, and you may not even have a heating system in there, period. But you also might have a hot water heater system, or you might have a actual fuel burning system for your heat. But let's talk about that startup and the whole thing about it starting up no problem.
So I'm just going to interject here for a minute. For most of you people that own deuces, tend to be more mechanically inclined, so they already know a lot of the stuff, or all this stuff. But there are some people that are new to it, and also a lot of people today are basically divorced from the mechanical workings of their car, because we've been taught to bring it to the mechanic. We've been taught that we can't work on them, and that's not entirely true. But I think back to the late '80s, and I think about when fuel injection kind of became the mainstay. The famous line from the car dealer was that you could just start your car up and on a cold day and just drive it. And that's a half truth, because yes, unlike the carbureted vehicles, which a lot of them, if you just started it up and it was really cold out and you stepped on the gas pedal and tried to drive away, put it in gear and drive away, and she'd die. Well, the fuel injected didn't really do that. The computer and the fuel injection would compensate for that. And I say computer, but there wasn't really much of one in the beginning, but there was a little bit of it. But that didn't mean you should drive it away like that. You should actually warm it up. But I thought I'd just bring that up, and now let's get back to what we were talking about. So let's talk about that cold startup. If you noticed, I reached down and turned the battery on the floor. There's a switch on the floor for the battery. That's kind of key to cold startups with the deuce, because that makes sure that it's disconnected completely while it's sitting, and there isn't a draw on it. Not that there are accessories to draw on it, but if you had any kind of electrical thing going on or it's draining, you don't have that because it's disconnected. So firstly, there's that, and obviously fully charged batteries, and batteries of the proper cranking amps. Civilian, that has civilian batteries in it. That's what the guy put in it. I kind of lean towards the military batteries, but if you have civilian batteries that are of the proper, that are decent batteries and are of the proper cranking amps and reserve power and cold cranking amps, then they're perfectly fine. As I said, I tend to lean towards the military ones, but if they're proper size and they're quality batteries, they'll work good. And that holds true for any vehicle. If you got batteries that are too small or crappy, that can cause hard starting, especially, and be magnified when it's cold out, whether it's a gas or a diesel motor. Okay, so there's that. Obviously, the connections to the batteries are solid. The wiring is good. All that. That's key to it. Proper charging system working properly. All that stuff. How well the engine runs, period, makes a difference. If you've got an engine that runs, that's not tuned up right and has issues, it's going to be even harder. Most times it's going to be even harder when it's cold out. So that's going to amplify any problem you have. So making sure that it doesn't have problems, that's key to it. Okay? Now, another thing that's key to it is making sure your heat system is off and all that, so it's not sucking the heat out of the engine, so that the engine doesn't get a chance to warm up or such. And that's more like right after it starts than it is when it starts. And we'll get into that. But another key factor, especially for diesel, is good fuel filters that are clean. Not too much crud in them. And then there's the fuel itself. Okay, a couple things about the fuel. One is winter blend fuel, which if you go to the pumps in the wintertime and you live in a cold climate, believe it or not, your fuel is going to be winter blend. Now, in the case of the diesel, you may even have to add an anti-gelling agent because you're going to deal with even colder temperatures, and you might have to add that to it. So keep that in mind. Along with that is what you use for an anti-gelling agent is important, because some of them can make the fuel somewhat abrasive by what they do. So not all brands are created equal, which brings me into the next subject as far as the diesels go, and not just the Deuce, which we'll talk a little bit about the fact that it's not really a diesel engine in a minute. But first off, you're going to want to have some sort of additive in your fuel. And no, it's not just, oh well, it'd be a good idea. No, you really should have an additive to lubricate your pump in your truck, especially if you know an older truck, because this new fuel, well, in a word, it sucks. Okay, I'm sorry, but it does. Technically, it's supposed to be more environmentally friendly, and in one aspect it is, in another aspect it isn't. We won't get into that too much, but what we will talk about is the fact that it can be abrasive and corrosive, and that goes for both the diesel fuel and the gasoline. Both, but let's concentrate on the diesel fuel for now. I'm using a product called House, and I use a winter formula for winter. That's both for the anti-gelling properties and for lubrication of injectors and high pressure pumps and all that your fuel system. So as I said, I'm going to say it one more time. Today's fuel is somewhat it's lacking. So you really do have to add something to counteract the issues that it can cause. As I mentioned, and there are other products out there that are good, that are really good, or just as good, and maybe even better than House. I'm using House because that's what the guy who owned it before used, and also he used it in his tow truck and other diesel vehicles, and he loves the stuff. And I have no reason, from what I've seen so far, that there's any reason that I should use something else. But there are some products out there that you should stay away from. I'm not going to mention any names of products because I don't want to get into a whole argument with people, but things that use alcohol and things like that in them can have a tendency to be abrasive. alcohol is what's in the new gasoline anyway. I know we're talking about diesel fuel, but I just thought I'd bring that up for a minute. So, good, clean fuel. Now, the Deuce can run on alternative fuels, but that statement's a little bit misleading because a lot of alternative fuels that it'll run on aren't necessarily good for it, or aren't good for winter use because, i.e., vegetable oil doesn't work because it gets too thick and it gels up easy. So, so as far as winter use, that's out. And then a lot of the stuff people use is dirty and all that good stuff, and not so good stuff, I should say. So, anyways, that's a factor. That your truck is maintained, fuel filters, oil changes, the proper oil, not just that it's diesel oil, but that it is able to be used in the right temperature range for what you're going to use it in. And a lot of times, synthetic can be the way to go because it has a larger temperature range, a temperature range like this, whereas the regular oil has a temperature range like this, which is fine if you know, I'm going to be in this temperature range, so I use this particular conventional oil. And then when it comes to summer or spring, I use this kind because it's for the higher temperatures and it's not going to be in that lower temperature. But the synthetic will cover a larger range, but it will cost you some money. And then there's some blends that are in between that you can use, and they work really well, and you can read up on those, and they're actually, it's a blend of the two, and it's basically, in a way, it's just that it's a little bit cheaper than a full synthetic, but it works really well and has the principles that synthetic has, where it has a wider range and keeps the viscosity at the proper level, in a wider range of temperatures. So that's a key factor, tune up. Now let's talk about some of the systems that they put in the Deuce for cold weather starting. First of all, if you read the instructions on them, they're for really cold. It's for when it's really cold, and you're only supposed to use them intermittently. There's a flame heater in there that you can use for heating the manifold. And then there's another one that they use that I really have kind of a disdain for, is, basically it's an ether shot. But there again, they tell you to use it sparingly, only in certain conditions. And it's just like a quick shot. Now here, let's talk about ether and starting fluid. And you can use it, and they use it for gas engines sometimes too. Okay. Do not use that unless you absolutely have to. Ask yourself this question: why am I having to use it? Is it just because it's cold out, or is it because there are other factors involved, like the engine's in poor shape, I didn't do this and I should have done that, weak battery, all that stuff. Okay, because especially for the Deuce, because it isn't truly a diesel, it's a compression motor, it has a little bit of an easier time. And why I have such disdain for ether is for one thing, you can wash cylinder walls. It can do some damage, especially if overused. So that's why I don't like it. And most time people are using it because something isn't right to begin with. So in a lot of those cases, it could be as simple as either your fuel was not properly blended for the conditions, or you might just need to put a shot of fuel where that ether was going to go. That may be all it takes to get it to catch, is to do that. So that's something to keep in mind. And especially with gas engines, like small gas engines, like small, pull start gas engine, sometimes you can just shoot a fine mist of good gasoline and boom, Starts right up. So that's something to keep in mind, which is another thing to keep in mind as far as, since we're talking about, misting fuel and all that. Diesels, for those of you who don't know it, try to not, especially old diesels, try to not run your vehicle out of diesel fuel, because then you have to prime it. It's not just the pain in the neck to prime it, it's that the pump ran dry and it's causing wear and tear on that pump because it was run dry. So keep that in mind. A good rule of thumb for a lot of people who have diesels, even with fuel prices being what they are today, is to always keep at least a quarter of a tank in your truck. And diesels, even to this day, sometimes you want to keep more in there for the simple fact that, especially if it's the middle of the night, it's diesel stations. Not every station has diesel. Lots of stations do nowadays, but not every station has diesel. And if you live in a small town, sometimes that can be especially hard if it's, really late at night and there's a lot more stations closed and the station that you get your diesel at is closed. So, all right, so let's jump into some tips and tricks as far as warm-ups and all that stuff. Okay. As far as any vehicle's concerned, really, how you shut that down previous to when you started it up cold makes a huge difference. Can make a huge difference, I should say. Sometimes you'll just get away with it. For instance, we'll pick on some teenager. Teenager's out in mom's minivan and he's got stereo cranked and everything, and he gets back and parks it, turns the key off, hops out. Okay? Some adults are guilty of this too. Or in fact, a lot of us are guilty of leaving some things on. Before you shut that engine down, you want to turn everything off you can before you actually shut it down. The fan for the heater, turn the heater off, all that stuff, because it'll make it easier for that to start in the morning. And it may be, in some cases, the difference between it starting. Not to mention the fact that because you turned all that stuff off, it actually can heat up. It can actually warm up quicker the next day when you turn it on, because it's not trying to A, suck all the heat out of it, B, it's not having it might be having a hard time starting if you have all those accessories on, because it's draining the battery